Caitlin Clark didn't need a basketball to make headlines this offseason. While sidelined by stalled CBA negotiations, she stayed in the public eye by endorsing Indiana football and the Chicago Bears, seemingly random shout-outs that, on closer inspection, were meticulously crafted plays. These weren't just sports fandom moments. They were cultural alignment strategies, positioning Clark as Indiana royalty despite a 7-month absence from competition.
If you're here for the real story and not the filtered version, subscribe. And if you're sticking around for the next meltdown, you better definitely subscribe.
Meanwhile, the Fever stayed quiet, doubling down on defense-first messaging and internal cohesion. But that silence spoke volumes. It wasn't just a matter of scheme anymore. It was a tug-of-war for the franchise's soul. Clark was building a brand. The Fever were building a system. And increasingly, it felt like the two had nothing in common. As Clark's public presence expanded beyond basketball, her on-court role shrank into discomfort. The improvisational wizardry that defined her collegiate dominance was stifled under a system that prioritized structure over instinct. Every screen she read before it formed. Every assist she anticipated seconds in advance. Those gifts didn't just go underused. They were rendered liabilities in a system demanding uniformity. The Fever's cultural bet on defense, once hailed as a foundation, became a rigid ceiling. And in that tightening gap between brilliance and blueprint, something had to give. Clark wasn't just losing touches, she was losing agency. The headline says it all. Indiana Fever fires Stephanie White. Caitlin fired her. No, Caitlin Clark didn't walk into the front office and demand her coach be let go. But make no mistake, this was a decision made in her shadow. A clash between a franchise's declared identity and the once-in-a-generation talent they drafted to save it. And when that identity starts costing you games, injuries, and public trust, you don't fire the system. You fire the coach. This wasn't just a basketball move. It was a philosophical surrender. A full 180 from the culture Indiana swore they were building. From day one, the Fever locked in on one thing: defense. Not just as a scheme, but as a brand. They hired Bree in January to make sure of it. A 7-time all-defensive team selection brought in specifically to hardwire discipline into the roster. Accountability, structure, grind culture. This was going to be a team that made its name on the other end of the court. And then they drafted Caitlin Clark, the most dynamic offensive engine the game has seen in years. A player whose basketball IQ doesn't run on set plays, but on the ability to read and manipulate the floor in real time. She doesn't need a screen drawn up for her. She creates screens by baiting defenders, by pulling gravity out toward the perimeter, by seeing the court 2 seconds ahead of everyone else. That kind of instinct can't be diagrammed, but Indiana tried anyway. Instead of designing a system around Clark's strengths, they dropped her into their system. One that demanded high-intensity rotations, off-ball movement, and full defensive buy-in from players whose bodies weren't prepped for that kind of sudden overload. Clark came from Iowa's read and react model, where she was allowed to flow with the game, improvise, create in the moment. The Fever asked her to lock into rigid systems, and it showed. The injuries came fast. Soft tissue, over and over. Only 13 games played. And while the public was told it was all just part of the learning curve, analysts were saying something different. This was a case of mismatched physical demands. When you take an elite offensive player and suddenly ask them to absorb a full load of defensive responsibility, high rotation rates, and constant movement, without phase preparation, something gives. The soft tissue damage wasn't random. It was biomechanical stress. And the turnover problem? Same deal. Clark led the league, but not because she suddenly forgot how to play. It was cognitive saturation. She was being asked to orchestrate complex offensive sequences and master defensive reads at WNBA speed. Without the freedom or autonomy she thrived on in college. That's a recipe for mental fatigue. Bad passes, rushed decisions, forced shots. Meanwhile, off the court, Clark was playing a very different game. With a 7-month layoff thanks to stalled CBA negotiations, she wasn't just sidelined. She was in limbo. No basketball, no momentum, just silence. So she created her own relevance. shouting out Indiana University football, backing the Chicago Bears, referencing specific players and moments. It looked casual. It wasn't. It was deliberate. Clark was embedding herself into the wider Indiana sports identity, curating loyalty without touching a basketball. Strategic visibility when performance wasn't an option. That kind of move speaks volumes, because it tells you she knows the power she holds. She knows the brand she's building isn't just about buckets. It's about culture, belonging, presence. And when she made that joke about poor kids doing defensive slide drills for hours, it didn't read like harmless banter. It read like a quietly blistering critique, a wink to the fact that maybe, just maybe, the Fever were overcorrecting, that not every player needed to be treated like a 3-and-D project in boot camp, that maybe this whole system needed to rethink what development actually looked like. Because let's be honest, this was never just about teaching defense. It was about asserting control. Clark's instincts didn't fit into their mold, and rather than shift the mold, they kept pushing hard. They committed to a vision that was bigger than any one player. Which sounds great, until your star can't stay on the court, the system doesn't produce wins, and the fan base starts asking whether the franchise is wasting her potential. The Fever were boxed in. If they changed course, they'd undercut everything they spent the last year preaching. But if they didn't, they risked more injuries, more turnovers, more alienation. They couldn't bench Clark. They couldn't sideline her game. So they did the only thing left. They fired the coach. Stephanie White became the symbol of the system that no longer made sense. The anchor weighing down a roster built around a player who couldn't and shouldn't be anchored. But that doesn't mean the Fever have solved anything. Now comes the real test. How do you build a system that actually fits Caitlin Clark? You can't just throw structure out the window, but you can reframe it. You can build something that teaches defense through offense, that uses game flow, ball screen coverages, and spacing to reinforce team concepts, without punishing the players whose minds operate at a different speed. You can build a hybrid. That doesn't mean abandoning accountability. It means redefining it, understanding that excellence looks different for different players, and that try to fit everyone into one mold isn't discipline, it's negligence. The Fever claimed their identity was non-negotiable. Defense was who they were. That's why they brought in Brienne January. That's why they drilled so hard. And yet they blinked. Because when it comes down to it, organizational identity doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists in context. And when the context is Caitlin Clark, you either adapt or you get left behind. The tension here is symbolic of a broader WNBA reckoning. The league wants to grow, to commercialize, to spotlight its stars, but also wants parity, structure, old school grit. The Caitlin Clark situation exposes the fault lines between those goals, between spectacle and system, between brand and blueprint. Can the league evolve fast enough to support athletes who don't fit the conventional mold? Clark's IQ doesn't operate like everyone else's. Her passing lanes aren't visible to normal players. Her playmaking doesn't follow standard sequences. She's not just executing, she's predicting. She doesn't need control. She is control, and trying to tether that to rigid schemes isn't just a waste. It's a risk, one that already cost her a significant chunk of her rookie season. So what does that leave us? Stephanie White is out. The Fever are resetting. But this isn't about swapping one coach for another. This is about recalibrating the entire framework. It's about whether a team and a league can build around genius rather than trying to retrofit it. Because if you can't support a player like Caitlin Clark, what are you building for? The Fever are at a crossroads. Their next hire isn't just a personnel decision. It's a philosophical one. Do they double down on rigid systems and risk losing the very essence of what makes Clark special? Or do they embrace a new kind of basketball logic, one that blends structure with intuition and culture with adaptability? That's the inflection point, not just for Indiana, but for the WNBA as a whole. Like, comment, and let us know where you stand on the coaching change. Should the Fever rework their entire identity, or should Clark be the one to adjust? And if you're following this evolving drama, hit subscribe, because we'll be here for every turnover, every injury report and every front office decision that shapes what happens next. The firing of Stephanie White wasn't just a tactical correction. It was a reckoning. It forced Indiana to confront a truth they had spent an entire season dancing around. You don't draft a generational player like Caitlin Clark and then force her into a system that was never built with her in mind. You rebuild around her, or you fall apart. And they were falling apart. 13 games. That's all they got from Clark in her first full WNBA season. 13 games filled with brilliant flashes, yes, but also exhaustion, injury, and a constant tug-of-war between what she was and what the Fever were trying to make her be. For a player who came into the league with more hype than anyone in recent memory, the return on investment should have been off the charts. Instead, a season full of unanswered questions, conflicting priorities, and one head coach sacrificed in the name of alignment. This wasn't a matter of impatience. It was survival. Clark's body literally couldn't withstand the demands placed on her. That's not a theory. It's the diagnosis. Soft tissue injuries don't come out of nowhere. They're a signal that the demands on her neuromuscular system exceeded her preparation. And the Fever didn't pivot. They didn't tailor. They didn't phase her into the system. They dropped her into the deep end and told her to swim laps and guard the perimeter at full speed. You could see it in her turnovers. She wasn't making bad decisions because she didn't understand the game. She was being asked to process everything at once. Offensive reads, defensive rotations, pace management, communication cues, all in a system that didn't reflect her natural rhythm. Even the best decision-makers can't operate at full efficiency when their mental bandwidth is maxed out. And Clark? She was overloaded. That's the part so many people miss when they look at the stats. They see the turnovers and think reckless. But the film tells a different story. It shows a player doing everything, too much, actually, and being punished by a system that failed to prioritize her strengths or protect her weaknesses. She was improvising within rigidity, trying to read and react in a framework that demanded scripted execution. It's like asking a jazz soloist to play note-for-note classical and wondering why the spark is missing. And yet, despite all of it, Clark never threw anyone under the bus. She could have made the tension public. She could have taken shots at the staff. She didn't. What she did do was post online. Subtle. Strategic. A Bears reference here. A college football shout-out there. Building ties. Crafting image. All while the CBA negotiations dragged on, and she was forced into months of silence on the court. That wasn't coincidence. It was media savvy. She stayed part of the conversation by aligning herself with Indiana's sports landscape, making herself indispensable to the region even without a basketball in her hands. And when she joked about poor kids doing endless defensive slide drills, that wasn't just humor. That was a message, a soft rebellion, a glimpse behind the curtain. Because what that comment really said was, I see the grind. I see the overkill. And I'm not sure this is the way. It resonated because people knew she wasn't wrong. The Fever didn't just overcommit to defense. They institutionalized it. Bria in January wasn't just an assistant coach. She was a signal, an enforcer, a reminder that defense wasn't optional. It was the identity. And when you make identity non-negotiable, you lose the flexibility to adapt, even when adaptation is the only thing that can save you. That's what made the Stephanie White firing inevitable. The Fever had reached a point where continuing down this path risked more than just games. It risked Clark's buy-in, her trust, her body. And when you're building around a star like her, that's a price you simply cannot afford. But here's the uncomfortable part. Even now, even post-firing, there's no guarantee the Fever will actually fix the core problem. Because firing a coach doesn't equal a philosophical shift. They could just as easily bring in someone new who preaches the same principles with a friendlier face. They could smooth the messaging, soften the delivery, but still cling to the core framework that put them in this mess to begin with. Because it's scary to pivot. Scary to admit that maybe the culture you invested in, defensive sacrifice, structural rigor, all those buzzwords, wasn't the right fit for this player. But if Indiana wants Clark to stay healthy, stay happy, and stay herself, they have to let go of the fantasy that they can have it all without change. They can't double down on the same schemes, and expect different results. They can't ask her to play 35 minutes of high-speed basketball while leading the offense, running rotations, and filling passing lanes without tailored support. It's not just unsustainable, it's negligent. And that's why this moment matters beyond Indiana. This is the WNBA's inflection point. Because Caitlin Clark isn't a system player. She's a system disruptor. A basketball anomaly who processes space and timing at a speed that renders most schemes obsolete. You don't tell her where to go. You let her tell you where the defense is weakest. And when you get that kind of talent, your job isn't to teach her how to play the game. It's to unleash her version of it. That's the direction Indiana has to take now. Not just for optics, for outcomes. The hybrid model isn't just a cute compromise. It's a necessity. You don't throw away defense. You integrate it within her strengths. You teach upside reads through offensive movement. You turn ball screen situations into teachable moments. You build context instead of drills. That's how you build trust. That's how you build longevity. Because what's at stake isn't just Indiana's record. It's Clark's legacy. And in the WNBA, legacy is the currency of growth. You don't grow the league by burning out your stars. You grow it by amplifying what makes them brilliant and keeping them on the floor to show it. This was never just about one coach. It's about vision. Do the Fever have the vision to see that their best chance at greatness doesn't come from making Clark adjust? It comes from adjusting to her? Because that's what this next chapter will prove. The system broke. The coach is gone. Now comes the rebuild. Let's hope they get it right this time. Here's the thing about breaking your system for one player. It's only controversial if that player isn't Caitlin Clark. Because if you're not willing to restructure for her, who are you willing to restructure for? That's the unspoken truth lurking behind Stephanie White's firing. The Fever didn't just admit that things weren't working. They admitted that Clark was the priority, even if it meant undoing the very culture they were trying to cement. And they didn't do it quietly. They made it loud, public, immediate. It had to be. Because every game they played under the old model made the gap more obvious. Clark wasn't thriving. She was adapting, surviving, making it work in spite of the system, not because of it. And that's not what you want from your centerpiece. You don't draft a disruptor, then punish her for disrupting. The problem is the Fever weren't just asking her to play within a new system. They were asking her to reprogram herself. Defensively, physically, mentally, all at once. And that's where the breakdown began. Because you can talk all day about buy-in and accountability, but when a player is leading the league in turnovers, barely staying healthy, and clearly out of rhythm, that's not a buy-in problem. That's a load problem. Clark wasn't refusing to carry the weight. She was being handed a barbell stack for someone twice her size with none of the prep. And when she staggered under it, the conversation stayed on the optics, turnovers, defense, learning curve. But underneath it all, it was a systems issue. The load was mismatched. Her skills weren't supported, and she was absorbing the consequences alone. What made it even more stark was the contrast between her public image and her on-court reality. Off the floor, Clark was building a fortress, carefully choosing her moments, aligning with Indiana's sports culture, posting about local teams, referencing plays, calling out Bears players by name. It looked casual, but it wasn't. It was calculated. She was building affinity while keeping the basketball drama at arm's length. And it worked, because when the friction started to show, when fans and analysts noticed her body language, her absence from the court, her comments about poor kids grinding out hours of defensive slides, she had already laid the groundwork for understanding. People got it. They saw it wasn't ego. It was misfit. That poor kids line wasn't just a joke. It was a leak, a coded message. It said, "This is too much for me and for them." And the fact that it came from someone as brand conscious as Clark, that's what made it land. She was telling you the system was broken without ever saying the word. The deeper issue here is about how teams interpret talent. Some franchises look at players like Clark and see brilliance to be managed. Others see brilliance to be set free. The Fever try to manage it, control it, fit it into something tidy. That's why their system clashed so hard. It didn't leave room for chaos. And Clark's genius is chaos. Controlled, high IQ chaos. She's not random. She's reactive. She plays off movement, off instinct, off probabilities that can't be diagrammed on a clipboard. Try to restrict, that was never going to work. And the numbers backed it up. Injuries, turnovers, lost possessions. But what was even more damaging than the metrics was what it revealed about how the Fever see themselves. They didn't just draft a superstar. They drafted someone who fundamentally challenged their identity. And at first, they resisted. They tried to hold the line. They brought in Brienne January. They reinforced the culture. They doubled down on defense as the non-negotiable. And it should have worked if the goal was to build a team that made sense on paper. But basketball isn't played on paper. It's played in real time, by real people, with real bodies and brains that break down when the inputs don't match the outputs. You can't run players through militaristic drills and then wonder why their instincts don't fire. You can't teach creativity with a whistle. Clark needed space. She needed a system that responded to her, not one that demanded she shrink to fit it. But what she got instead was a full-contact crash course in tough love basketball, a model that viewed her instincts as undisciplined instead of elite. And now that it's failed, the Fever have no more excuses. They can't say she just needs time. They've had time. They can't say the system works. It didn't. And they definitely can't say the coach had full control of the locker room. Not when Clark's version of basketball was an open conflict with everything Stephanie White tried to implement. So they made the call. And now, every move the Fever make from here on out will be viewed through one lens. Is this a system that elevates Clark or restrains her? That's the new baseline. Because the hybrid model, the one people keep whispering about, that's the only path forward now. The Fever have to build a program that teaches defense through offense, that uses Clark's natural reads to teach help side rotations, that anchors the team in structure but gives her the leash to manipulate space the way only she can. Anything else is just waiting for another breakdown. Because the problem was never that Clark can't play defense. She can. But asking her to master elite defensive coverage while orchestrating an entire offense, without phased integration, that's where it breaks. That's where the injuries come. That's where the mental overload starts chipping away at her confidence, her timing, her playmaking. And that's when you lose her. Not in a trade, not in free agency. You lose her spirit. You lose the very thing that makes her dangerous, the spark. That's what the Fever were risking. And whether they realized it too late or just refused to see it, the outcome is the same. Stephanie White had to go, not because she was a bad coach, but because she was the wrong coach for the player they drafted. And now, they're on the clock. Because you don't get unlimited resets with a player like Clark. You don't get to waste seasons figuring it out. You either surround her with people who get it, or you start preparing for a future where she decides to build something new somewhere else. That's how high the stakes are. This isn't just about a system change, it's about trust. And trust is fragile in a league still finding its financial and structural footing. The WNBA cannot afford to waste its brightest lights. Not in this era. Not when fans are finally tuning in. Not when players are demanding more and deserve more. So here's what has to happen now. The Fever need a coach who understands nuance. Someone who can build around principles without making them prisons. Someone who understands that you don't teach greatness through repetition. You guide it through context. You show Clark how defense can elevate her offense. You teach communication through movement. You let her lead not just with her voice, but with her vision. Because she has vision. She's shown it on every court she's ever touched. The question is, can the Fever match it? Let us know your take. Was the firing inevitable? Can the Fever actually pivot? Or are they just rearranging the same philosophy under a different name? Like the video, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe if you want to keep following this saga as it unfolds. Because if this past season was any indication, the battle between vision and structure in Indiana is just getting started.